Chapter 7. A Healing Home. Danielle and I decided to stay at my house for several reasons. First, she didn't want people just showing up and checking on her. It is a small town, and if people saw she was home, they would have been knocking on her door. The second reason we decided to stay at my house was that we had a little more space to move around in. And that was also sort of the third reason. My roommate was a massage therapist and a yoga instructor, so she had tons of pillows to keep Danielle comfortable. Plus, it was the right energy for us to be around while healing. I was subleasing a room from her, but she had made the house feel very peaceful and serene. I had enjoyed living at the house since practically the moment I moved to Sedona. It was just off the Thunder Mountain trailhead. In fact, I would walk out my backyard and across the street to reach the entrance. Thunder Mountain is the mountain Walt Disney modeled his big ride Thunder Mountain Railroad after. I loved that I could freely explore Sedona out my backyard. I hadn't spent much time at my house after I met Danielle. We spent most of the time at her dance studio. She still had 2 roommates living at her house. Danielle didn't feel they were ready for the burden. My roommate was the exact opposite, so staying at my house put Danielle at the most ease. Keeping Danielle comfortable to the best of my ability was my top priority. My roommate thankfully had a nice collection of hard pillows and body props from her time as a body worker and yoga teacher. Danielle felt most comfortable being propped up in bed, similar to the way a hospital bed would have her sit. It was the best position to provide the least discomfort. Managing her comfort levels was the most challenging task at this point. I was giving her MMJ foot rubs at least 4 or 5 times a day. Not only did the medicine usually help relax her, but the feet have connections to all parts of the body. And I would notice an improvement every time I would give her a foot rub. I still felt rather helpless, so I did everything I could to help Danielle feel better. After a week in the hospital, we were both very eager for additional answers. The hospital hadn't provided us with the answers we both needed. Danielle had a doctor friend who we were going to be meeting with as soon as we returned to Sedona. It would take a couple of days before we would see him, but the questions needed answers. Most of the questions that we had were about alternative treatments and other radical options. Doc was a man who had spent years providing solutions that medical industry declined to offer. Doc was a little radical, and I would say one of the most knowledgeable individuals about cancer. He knew his stuff, and at the same time was a very complicated individual. Doc was also someone who was tormented by loss. Our situation wasn't making things easy for him. Looking back now, I truly sympathize more than anything. He too had lost his spouse and best friend several years prior. He lost his license to practice as a doctor because he was willing to do anything for his wife. Danielle and I both believed that what he did helped keep her alive longer so that they could share the special time they had together. The doc was an eccentric genius type, and it took all the smarts I had to keep up with him. Much of what he discussed was very familiar to me. Most of my online reading usually involved educating myself on topics about healing, diet, and disease. If I was researching a topic, I was truly confident in the validity of what I had researched. I often looked at all perspectives, and then I used discernment to conclude. I will admit that I've been proven wrong from time to time, but for me, it just is ever expanding my truths. Doc's knowledge was overwhelming and humbling. After a week of disappointing answers and general lack of general health treatment or knowledge, I was relieved. The doc, in my opinion, was our first set of real answers from an experienced doctor. I had spent the past nearly 2 weeks begging my wife to start using some of the treatments I would recommend. Monatomic elements, or ORMUS, had been shown repeatedly to cure cancer. They used the platinum elements in chemotherapy. They used platinum and palladium mixed with toxic chemicals. I had read papers that said the metals themselves, if used properly in the right doses, could help cure cancer. Danielle wouldn't take it until the doc said it was okay. If she wasn't already familiar with it, she didn't want to hear about it. I failed my first test. I think it is important that I tell people that I messed up at this point in the recovery process. I did what we found to be the biggest mistake that so many people make. I was pushing the treatment that I thought would help cure her cancer. Feeling helpless made me believe that I could gain control if we did my cure to cancer. It didn't matter to Danielle what my choices would be. I didn't make the mistake for long. I started to understand that Danielle was going to do things her way. It didn't matter to her that my way was to use electromagnetic therapy devices, something she couldn't do because frequency treatments could trigger her Addison's disease, and we couldn't have her going through adrenal failure while trying to recover from cancer. I had to learn to keep my mouth shut. I had to respect that my wife wanted to do for her treatments. It wasn't up to me to decide what was best for her. She was the only one who could make that decision. The only thing I could do was talk her through the decisions that she was making. I could help make sure that she felt they were the completely right thing to do, even if it wasn't the way I would do it. I feel every person has a treatment that will be most effective for them. Belief in the treatment, or vice versa, the lack of belief in the treatment, can decide the outcome. The placebo and nocebo effect have repeatedly shown that sugar pills can cure people, and a belief in a sugar pill is poison, can injure or even kill. A belief in sugar has the power to heal or kill depending on what the person believes is fact. It doesn't work all the time, but it works more times than science could pass off to chance. I think this was my biggest lesson and something I would continue to learn and refine throughout the course of our ordeal. After our first meeting with Doc, I was convinced that we were going to beat this. He had confirmed that we needed to do lots of antioxidants, which was something I strongly supported, including making sure she had proper clean water. We were banned from drinking tap, although I had stopped drinking tap water years ago. I would go thirsty versus drink tap water while I was staying at Danielle's, not really by choice, but instinct. I know the difference between water that makes you feel good and the dead water that is passed off as water these days. I was drinking structured water from my roommate's work so that it would provide a healthier charge. Danielle immediately switched to this water. The next thing we were going to be doing was alpha lipoic acid mixed with palladium, another dietary supplement that had been shown to beat cancer as well. I was excited that it had one of the platinum elements in it because it helped bring up using the ormus and colloidal minerals. Doctors said no harm would come from using those supplements. I was finally allowed to start using some of my techniques to help beat this cancer. I wish I had checked my ego to start. This behavior created much tension between Danielle and me. I knew that what I wanted to give her had no negative reactions, but it didn't matter to her. It was purely a beneficial supplement that had so many benefits that it was crazy to me that she wouldn't take it. She wanted to know for sure that it would help her, and nothing I said could convince her otherwise. I was more than persistent, and the constant pressure I applied to get her to take it was met with more and more resistance. It created such resistance that it almost created a fear of the supplement. A fear that I knew she had towards using electromagnetic therapy devices. My roommate had a very subtle EMF device at the house, and my wife, before getting sick, wouldn't even get near. I knew she had some apprehension, and because of her medical history, it was set in stone. I knew better than to try to change her mind on this subject. If only I had realized I applied that to all subjects, then I might have avoided some problems. Despite Danielle's beliefs, I also asked the doc his opinion about Rife electromagnetic therapy devices. He told me personally that he only trusted the original device that Dr. Rife created. Some of the other new devices have such a mix of frequencies that they may or may not be helpful. In my research and experience, I was noticing the same thing. This was another interesting confirmation from a knowledgeable doctor. I had a simple Rife device, but it wouldn't allow for precise tuning to certain frequencies, and that shortcoming I felt made it far less effective. I still wish that it was something that we could have tried, but the lack of support from the doc and Danielle left that treatment on the shelves. According to Danielle, there wasn't going to be a chance in hell that she was going to try EMF treatment. All my research and understanding of the disease had not prepared me for cancer's greatest challenges. Nothing could have equipped me for the experience of going through cancer with a loved one. It felt like a crash course with a lot more crashing than staying on course. I would make many mistakes along the journey, mistakes I always hoped to grow through. First, I needed to learn to respect my wife's decisions no matter what. I didn't have to agree, but I always needed to show her the highest respect. In no way would I disrespect her decisions by telling her to do something opposite to what she decided. I couldn't push a single opinion about treatment without ample supporting proof. The truth is that most of what we had studied and read was still something that I would classify as in my opinion. In my opinion, what I discovered is that people have a hard time respecting other people's decisions, especially if those decisions are contradictory to our own. Just because something is true in my life and not true in yours, it doesn't make either of us right or wrong. For example, in my opinion, clowns are funny and joyful. A doctor would be wise to prescribe me clowns if I'm feeling depressed. However, if he prescribed that to someone scared of clowns, he could end up sending that person to a mental institution. A silly metaphor, but sadly, our medical system doesn't consider belief structures, despite belief playing a fundamental role in the placebo effect. Our talk with the doc resulted in many insights and revelations about what the plan of attack should be. Cancer is a disease that consumes and eats the food of the body. By stage 3C, there was a chance the cancer had started to spread, even though we had no proof that it had spread to any other parts of the body. But the risk with stage 4 is that the tumors start to develop everywhere. My theory is that the tumors develop wherever the body is weakest. My wife's most traumatized area was her woman parts. The repeated abuse of men and the constant jealousy of women made the area a prime spot for cancer. The doc told us that cancer was an opportunistic disease. His statement resonated the most with me. Everything I had seen in my studies showed that it would attack the weakened parts of the body. Broken hearts would lead to breast cancer, control issues, or a life that is out of control would lead to pancreatic cancer, or people that had communication issues would be at risk for thyroid cancer. These weren't sole causes, but if a disease was opportunistic, I could see the life patterns that would weaken certain parts of the body. I was learning, and I knew that the path the doc had sent us on was the right one. I would say that a sense of relief set over the both of us as we finally knew what we were doing to combat Danielle's cancer. It was a mix of 9 different dietary supplements that were all known to be super antioxidants. We were also going to start using the hyperbaric oxygen chamber to help her healing. And we were going to start using IV treatment as well. There was also other treatments we were going to implement as her healing from surgery progressed. The priority was getting her diet dialed in, while also making sure she got lots of rest. Rest, I could tell, was the most important factor in how strong she felt daily. Alternatively, if she spent too much of the day stressed or worried, it would wear her out. When Danielle was worn out, the pain would increase and she would suffer the most at night. Immediately after returning to my home, we began a late night shower ritual to help her deal with the pain. I set up a stool for her to sit on in the shower, and I would sit next to the shower for support. I was usually the temperature control for her, so she didn't have to get up or move. It was impossible for her to stand for any length of time, so she would have to sit for the entire shower. Rarely did we not use all the hot water in the house for a therapeutic session, but we would spend 10 to 20 minutes in the shower. The improvement that the water would provide was worth the time involved. The gentle stream would melt away the pain. My wife found the warm water very soothing and helpful in her healing process. During the first couple of weeks, sleep was always a big challenge. She took some naps, and the MMJ was helping to put her to sleep from time to time. I can't forget that while this was happening, I was working 2 jobs for a time. It might have seemed overwhelming if it weren't for the fact that I decided I was going to rise to the occasion, or at least give it everything I had. Failure wasn't an option for me. I loved Danielle with all my heart, and she deserved 110% of the love I had to give. It was clear to me she also needed the support. My priority was being there for my wife. Nothing else in my life mattered to that degree. So in between shifts, I would run home to let the dog out and usually indulge Danielle with a foot rub to reapply meds. Often I would also have to help her to the bathroom as she could not walk on her own without a walker for the first several weeks. The ordeal physically and emotionally drained Danielle. It was difficult to face the people in her life with the new reality she was facing. Danielle didn't want to share her problems with the community. If people were having trouble in their lives, Danielle was the person many people would turn to when times were tough. She knew how to listen. Danielle gave people a beautiful space to share their deepest pains. Most people who interacted with her would be left a better person because this is what she did. She never gave up on anyone that she cared about, and for her, the community was her family. I learned all families, by blood or otherwise, have their problems. She shared her problems about the community, but started hiding her conversations with her real family. I had shown some concern that she was getting upset with her family, primarily how upset her mother could make her. It bothered me that most interactions I observed would end up with Danielle being upset. Much of the stress stemmed from the fact that her mom expected Danielle to do or at least try chemotherapy. Her mom did not understand the risks or practically anything about chemotherapy at that point. Like many people who still have faith in the medical establishment, they don't ever acknowledge the risks or the dangers associated with our prescription pill medical industry. My wife would repeatedly explain the risks she was facing because of her previous medical issues. Danielle's sensitivities made chemotherapy potentially life-threatening. Even her mother showed zero respect for her decision, causing unnecessary stress. Danielle knew what was best for herself, and no one was going to change her mind. Never once did our family show a sign that they believed Danielle was doing the right thing. Danielle most of all wanted her mother's support, but struggled to gain it. Danielle was constantly looking for ways to win her mother's approval. Her mother wanted her to go to the oncologist, and Danielle hoped that would earn her cooperation. We were willing to try anything to change her mind. Danielle's mom, like many other people, feels that chemotherapy is the only solution to cancer, and she wouldn't entertain that there were other options. Everyone her mother knew did chemo. Some survived, and for that reason, she thought it worked. I can't blame her for her experiences, but not everyone responds well to chemotherapy. I can attest to that personally working in the medical marijuana industry. Additionally, many cancer patients suffer due to complications caused by chemo. The facts show chemo kills people every year because it can cause such serious reactions in a sick or weakened body. Danielle and I even had several people tell us about relatives that had to stop chemo because it made them too sick. Others told us that the chemo did so much damage that it ruined their quality of life, leaving most in medicated comas before passing. I couldn't handle how upset her mother was making her and that they were calling every day expecting a full update from Danielle. I told her that she needed to cut back on talking with them because it was stressing her out. She started to make sure that she would talk to them while I was at work. For a week, this had been going on, and the daily updates with her sister and mother were becoming problems. Even though she wasn't telling me, I could tell something was stressing her out. It wasn't very difficult for me to deduce what was causing her additional stress, but I said nothing. It was her decision despite my reservations. Danielle's sister did not help the situation. Repeatedly, Danielle would complain to her sister about her mother's behavior. Emotions always ran high during their conversations. Too often, Danielle had to curb her sister's emotional outbreaks. Danielle was using her emotional strength to handle each interaction. Danielle rarely felt like her sister was on her side. I tried to keep my opinions to myself, but it was difficult. Danielle's family upset me the most because I was always the one that had to deal with the repercussions, especially when I was home for an argument, and I could see the immediate impact. It was so much more obvious the impact anger and stress were having on Danielle's recovery. Stress would keep Danielle up all night in unbearable pain. I would wake up every hour or two to apply more medications or shower her. I always did everything she needed. Danielle finally told me she was hiding that she was talking to her family still, telling her I already figured that out. She was surprised I didn't say anything, explaining I was trying to respect her space. We always talked about everything, and until the previous week, we would talk about how much her family would upset her. So when I could tell she was upset without any reason, I started to have some ideas. So if she wasn't telling me about what was stressing her, then the stress must be her family. I told her how obvious it was that they were straining her recovery. It was difficult for me to maintain a positive attitude towards their behavior after this. I was barreling into one of my first major mistakes. It finally happened, and I snapped on Danielle's sister. There wasn't anything special about their disagreement, but I finally had enough. I quickly repossessed the phone. Danielle knew I had a couple of things to say, but she asked me to be calm. I was not in the mood to be nice, my first major error in judgment. I had a few rather choice words for her sister, and when I'm angry because I feel wronged, I can get rather righteous. Practically yelling into the phone, I told her sister exactly how I felt. I couldn't believe how much she allowed her mother to treat Danielle poorly. Also, repeatedly causing Danielle to be upset was so heinous in my eyes. It all happened in a blind rage, a rage that I wish I never let loose. I felt she was a huge problem, and I let her know, as aggressively as possible, a fatal error on my part. Danielle's sister didn't think she had a problem, and nothing I said changed that. My aggression immediately had her sister on the defensive. The conversation was a complete failure on my part. I only showed an unhealthy expression of my anger to her sister. I regret ever behaving in a way that would cause such massive repercussions down the road. My first regret is that it was not helpful to act that way in front of my wife. I should have at least walked outside. I wish most of all that I had communicated my issues calmly versus an all-out verbal assault. I rarely showed my anger to anyone, but Danielle and I had plenty to be angry about. Danielle's anger was more than enough for the two of us. When it came to anger, we had a lot in common. I did my best to hide my anger, hoping not to let her suffer. I knew that I shouldn't be around people if I'm angry. However, this experience was testing my capacity to control my anger to the highest degree. It was important to me that I not make my wife suffer my emotional outbursts. Finding a way to control my emotions was imperative for Danielle's healing. There was enough stress in our lives that we couldn't control. Danielle faced mountains of obstacles in her recovery. Even the thought of having to go to the hospital would cause severe anxiety. People or doctors questioning her treatment stressed her out. Convincing others to support her decision would anger her. It was impossible to avoid all the problems. The best we could do was handle them to the best of our abilities. Danielle didn't think I would support her in setting up an appointment with the oncologist. I feel bad that she felt that way. She had secretly gone with a friend to schedule the first appointment. Her friend had to convince her that it was the right thing to do. Danielle said her friend literally held her hand the whole way. She still needed me to take her to the appointment, so she informed me of her decision. I didn't mind at all because I wanted to see if I could find some more answers too. I obviously wouldn't have wished that she needed to go through that experience, but I was going to make the best of it. Danielle and I agreed that we needed more answers. Answers that could provide the real reasons why Danielle was choosing to forego traditional cancer treatments. It was a long shot to find the answers we were looking for in a place that promotes chemotherapy. Without a visit, I didn't see any other way to get her family off our back. The pressure to go was too much stress for my wife, and she gave in, causing more problems than I anticipated. The other big stressor that was hanging over Danielle was making a formal announcement to the dance community. For the first 2 weeks, we had just given a general, Danielle is temporarily in the hospital and we will let you know as things develop. Danielle knew this wasn't a satisfactory answer for her students and that Danielle had to get a real message out to the community. Thankfully, one of the mothers stepped up and helped with contacting all the students. It was too overwhelming and exhausting for Danielle or me to handle. Knowing the silly, rude, or stupid comments that people make, it would have been far too much stress for either of us. It was nice that someone offered their energy and time to handle all the responses or headaches that came up, which surprisingly more rude comments came back in response than we anticipated. There was a general show of support, but surprisingly there were some that Danielle's friend wouldn't even share with her. The one that got me was one wealthy parent that had just recently bragged to Danielle about spending $40,000 on a home renovation, even asked about a couple of $100 refund. Considering at the time Danielle was out of work and we didn't have enough to cover the 6 months of treatment, it felt thoughtless. It was hard when people are more concerned about themselves than others. Thankfully, not all people behave poorly, and many people just showed their unconditional support. We received a dozen gift cards to the local healthy grocery stores, which were a relief for us. I still can't express the gratitude we felt. Danielle also loved the people who sent her a text every week saying that they were thinking about her. Most were wishing they could see her, even though she wanted her privacy. Although we found through the experience there was a fine line to being respectful of people's boundaries and pushing individuals' needs over those boundaries. Making someone feel guilty for wanting their privacy is a behavior that we found appalling. Danielle dealt with this issue from both friends and family. We chose to live at my house for an extra level of protection from the public. No one knew where I lived except the friends she told. My roommate was also a saint and helped us out immeasurably, respecting Danielle's privacy. She didn't tell anyone at her work what was happening because she didn't want loose lips to tell people anything that wasn't the complete truth. It was important to her that the message she gave to everyone would be perfect. There was no room for errors when it came to communicating with the community. Danielle said misheard rumors were common in Sedona. Maybe rich people have nothing better to do. I think Sedona suffers from elitism of all types. Elite super rich to ultra super spiritual hippies. The super rich live above everyone in their mega mansions, acting in life exactly how they live. Sedona throws a different level of elitism into the mix. The self-proclaimed gurus who proclaim their beliefs above all others, these people believe that they are always right and will not listen to someone who challenges them. They will often find it important to force their opinion on you if you think differently from them. My wife told me she has told several people who were preaching from a place that put themselves above all others. I too see the behavior throughout our society. The irony in our spiritual community is that many of the spiritual gurus are behaving the exact opposite of how Jesus or Buddha taught people how to behave. Acceptance and love with humility while forgiving those who do not know what they do. The rich tend to force their desires because with the money they tend to use their money to get what they want. And if you have enough money, there is almost no limit to what you can buy these days. So the rich don't understand the concept of no. They only believe more money and power are needed to attain a yes. So my wife has had to put a few rich people in their place because they were using their money to control or manipulate people to get what they want. Even if it put her at financial risk, Danielle would do the right thing no matter what. At times she had to show restraint to protect her business, but she still would do the right thing. The other problem with Sedona is that it is a small town. People that have lived here for a long time know everyone else through maybe 1 or 2 degrees of separation. It's quiet and slow-paced, but it also has its share of problems. Local business owners face many problems when operating in a small town. Public opinion plays a huge part in if a business will make it or fail. I watched this happen to my roommate's business that she was managing. The owner would take pride in being an a-hole to customers he deemed unworthy. The behavior I would never want to be listed on Yelp. In a world where businesses can succeed or fail based on online customer reviews, it is a terrible idea to give people a reason to write a bad review. In restaurants, it was common understanding that people who have a bad experience would tell 8 to 10 people, but people who have a great experience will only tell 1 or 2. So bad experience will ruin a business's reputation, and in a small town, this is doubly true. A bad rumor could ruin someone's reputation or business. Danielle cared about her business deeply, which is why it was so important to communicate properly with the community about her condition. It took about 3.5 weeks for Danielle to finalize a statement. We had to tell everyone that Danielle was going to be in treatment for cancer and that we were going to have to cancel classes for the semester. We didn't include the fact that her healing was taking far longer than we had anticipated, and the stress of teaching would not be beneficial for her healing either. Danielle felt it was important to let everyone know that she had gotten married and that I had been caring for her with a small group of other ladies. We asked that the people respect her privacy through everything. The next couple of days after the announcement would be highly emotional. Many people were shocked to hear the news that she had cancer. We were overwhelmed by the show of support. We received many letters and gift cards that were crucial to relieving any stresses we were facing emotionally and financially. After weeks of isolation, it was good to have a change of pace. Danielle was relieved to get the burden off her chest and start moving forward. It took a month before she had the strength to start talking and telling people what happened. It was hard for her to talk about it, and she always feared people would say something upsetting. People don't always respond well to bad news, and for that reason, they don't always behave appropriately. It was a chronic issue we faced. The other fun challenge we had was the baby, as Danielle referred to her. Her real name was Andorra, but being a miniature blonde Pomeranian, she was cuter than a baby. She wouldn't even allow people refer to the baby as a dog. Her mom had trained her to be the perfect child. She would sit in a chair, she would wear sunglasses, and her mom would have her do other fun tricks. Andorra truly was a diva, and like her mother, loved to be the center of attention. Andorra was the most intelligent and complex dog that I had ever met. She ran me through the ringers when I first met Danielle. Andorra was jealous of all the attention we were giving each other, but Andorra made her needs known. It didn't take long before I won Andorra over. She messed with me until I started giving her a lot of attention too. Andorra and I had already had a strong bond before we decided to move her into my house. We picked up Andorra the day after we got back to Sedona. For the first 2.5 weeks, she was quite the perfect angel. My roommate was concerned with Andorra causing us to lose the security deposit. Since she was trained to sit in the chair, we would only have her in the chair or on the bed while she was inside. I took her for a walk 4 or 5 times a day so that we didn't feel bad about keeping her confined. It was working fine, but then my roommate broke down and allowed the dog to run around. I made a mistake and didn't let her out before I fell asleep, and Andorra had an accident in my roommate's bedroom. After that, my roommate was rather upset with her. On top of all the help she provided, my roommate was dealing with a crazy boss who was causing so much unnecessary stress. Andorra, being a rather sensitive individual, started acting out the more my roommate would ignore her for her misbehaving. It was a circumstance that eventually drove us out of that environment. Andorra wanted attention and would do anything to get it. My roommate played into her manipulation. I don't find Andorra misbehaves if she receives the proper attention, as she taught me. As I mentioned before, Andorra messed with me when I first met Danielle. She pooped and peed on my side of the bed in a bid for attention, so this wasn't completely unfamiliar. Andorra started a vicious cycle of misbehaving for attention, causing me to forfeit my security deposit. Thankfully, while that problem was occurring, we received a message that Danielle's tenant was moving out. She had another tenant that didn't appear to be using the house. We could move back into Danielle's house with the privacy she wanted. It would be, thankfully, an easy move. Several of Danielle's friends offered to clean the house before we moved in. It was perfect timing for us to move back into her house. It was obvious the increased stress of our life was causing some serious additional stress in my roommate's life too. It wasn't fair to continue to ask her to put up with the extra stress that we had brought into her world, especially if we had a safe place to continue Danielle's recovery. Our return to Danielle's home was actually the first time I was able to wander around the house freely. She had made it a rule with her tenants that she wouldn't have other people over in the house, especially other men. When we met, we didn't need to use the rest of the house. Now the studio was completely inadequate to support Danielle in her healing. We would need access to the whole house, and somehow it had manifested 1 month before we expected it to happen. It felt like divine interventions transpired to make it happen. One bad situation pushes us one way, and life provides a solution. A very common theme throughout our journey. I refer to it as synchronicity, but I think most people refer to it as a miracle. Every day felt like it was a miracle, but we were still praying for the big miracle. Now we had to take advantage of the miraculously clean house that had manifested. We were heading back to our home, a first for us as a married couple. It felt like a dream to finally be home after our previous month's journey.